Thank you for joining the webinar today. I've just put the webinar into live mode, so thank you for joining. I will start on the hour, so we've got another 3 minutes just to wait for other attendees to join. While we wait, you'll notice that there's a chat pod on the right-hand side of the console. Feel free to ask any questions to either myself, Joe Levins, or Mo Yogi, who will be presenting today. And just to quickly help me, could you, just to check the audio is working well, if you could just click on the hand symbol that appears next to your name on the attendee drop-down, and that means that I can ensure Thank you for joining today. I've just put the webinar into live mode, but we will start on the hour.
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as...
just to ensure that you can hear me okay, if you could just click on the hand symbol that exists next to your name on the console under attendees, and raise your hand. Great, thank you very much for doing that. Some of you can have done that, so I know that you can hear me well. Great. Like I said, we will start shortly. Just give us another minute or so, and then we'll go into the webinar. There's also, just before we start, sorry, just before we start, there's a chat pod. So either during or at the end of the webinar, I'm more than happy to read out some of the questions that you may have. So please feel free to post any questions that you can think of during the session. We want to try and make it as interactive and as fun as possible. And like I said, I'm just waiting for the last minute for attendees to join, and then we'll kick off. Great, so I think we're going to start to get going in a minute. Could you just raise your hand just again to just double check that you can hear me okay on the audio? Great, thank you. Right, so we're on the hour, so I think we should get going. Everyone's automatically on mute mode. So if you would like to ask a question, please post a question in the chat pod. So yeah, welcome to the next Lunch and Learn session today. Today we're going to be covering the principles of design. So it's with myself, Joe Levins. I'm based here in the UK, and with Mo Yogi, who's our creative designer, freelance designer, based in South Africa. Mo, do you just want to quickly say hello? Just want to check that you're there.
Hi, everybody.
Brilliant.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, we can. Yes, so we might as well get going. So yeah, like I said, this session is as interactive as you would like it to be. So please post some questions during the session, and we'll endeavour to get those questions answered. So basically what we're going to cover is explore the 6 principles of design that are at the foundation of every design project. So whether this is you working on a brochure, or for a photography piece or sketching a new logo for a client, that these principles apply. And most importantly, actually, how CorelDRAW Graphics Suite and the new CorelDRAW Graphics Suite 2019 that we launched recently this year in March can really help you achieve these principles in every project that you work on, and so you can create the best creative design possible. So we're going to run through each of the principles and most importantly, give you some practical examples of how you can apply these principles and get the best out of your designs. So those 6 principles are sort of covered here. So we're going to cover off unity, and unity and harmony go together, and really in a piece how you can create that through anything, through color, through pattern, through the distance of the elements within that design. We'll also focus on balance and how you achieve balance with a symmetrical or even an asymmetrical design, that you apply some basic rules there to ensure that there's a nice balance that's being achieved to that visual piece. We're going to cover off scale and proportion, so making sure that when you're considering your design that you look at the scale and choose the right scale and ratio to ensure that there's a proportion through the piece. We're going to cover off rhythm, so whether you can do that through using like a reoccurring image, or create rhythm through size or color, or a graphical element being a focal point, that there's a sort of a rhythm within your design. And lastly, we'll cover off the 2 last things, contrast, and using sort of emphasis between different elements, different shades to showcase the contrast within a visual piece, or look at other ways to create emphasis within your designs, and using CorelDRAW to be able to do this. So the first principle that we're going to flick into and show you practical examples is unity. So underbedding that unity is, as I've mentioned, sort of how you can create unity in a piece using the principles of proximity, of sort of distance between elements within a design, with the sort of similarity within those elements, the repetition of the element, and to create a lovely repetition and harmony. And here is an image that Mo has put together and has designed, and he's really going to quickly show you now how to enhance that unity that actually you're already seeing between some of those visual elements, like the vegetables there that feature a rhythm and a sort of a similarity. So Mo, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. So guys, basically what we're hoping to achieve with this is share with you possibilities around creating compelling design. And I think a lot of us, you know, we sit there and we create content, having to chase deadlines all the time. And of course, the idea here is that, you know, perhaps there is a templated way of creating consistent, high quality design. And the answer is yes. And I think that's what Joe alluded to a little earlier. So without further ado, let's see how we can explore unity within the context of a CorelDRAW design experience. So we're going to head over to the connect content Docker. It always trips me up. I think we need to rename that Docker, but the connect content Docker is where we're going to head over to. And what I'd like to share with you is I'm actually looking at content on my hard drive at this point in time, and very specifically to the folder that we're talking to. So you can load your own content. And what's pretty cool about this is we're seeing everything visually as we're working through. So to Joe's point, we're going to start with this Nature's Best piece. So let's go ahead and open it. And we'll revert back to the presentation in a minute. And of course, the first thing we can do is with regards to the concept of unity and repetition, what Joe alluded to perhaps was we have this horizontal place. So we've got the horizontal text of where Nature's Best is sitting, and then you've got the subheading, and then of course the body copy. And similarly, you can see that that's kind of mirrored, I guess is the word, with the soil. And of course, what we'd like to do here is I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and we're looking at unity by way of color. So how can you unify a document by way of color? So there's different possibilities, of course, that are open to us. And what we're going to go ahead and do here is you'll notice that we've got different color themes running through, and of course orange is a primary, or a warm color, I should say, not a primary color. So I'll go ahead and select the headline, and then I'm going to go ahead and make use of this eyedropper tool, the color eyedropper, and I'm going to go ahead and tag that orange. So we have two flavors of orange here. I'm going to tag the deeper orange, and then I'm going to head over to the text, and I'm just going to go ahead and apply that. So let's see how that's worked out for us thus far. So you can see that just by way of playing with color, we can kind of achieve a kind of unity by making sure that we have association based on color. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to use the same methodology again, but what I'm going to do this time is let's go ahead and choose that text box. And I would like to pick up the green, which is quite prominent. So I'll go ahead and pick up the green, and then once again, in fact, let's zoom in again. So I hit the text and not the outline. Of course, I could save this as a swatch on my document swatches. So again, what I could then do is just go ahead and choose the green as appropriate. And once again, I'm going to zoom out so you can see this better. And there you can see what we're starting to build is we're starting to build a color hierarchy that tends to flow from bottom up and then from top to bottom. And you kind of get this nice and easy flow. And you know, if a client said to you, hey, listen, perhaps what we'd like to do is we'd like to make the copy stand out a little bit more, for example, the body copy. Sure, you could go white, but we could also go ahead and pick up this kind of reddish color, which is not quite altogether white. And again, you can see that there's a kind of play in terms of the way the color represents itself or presents itself more appropriately. The second part of this conversation that Joe and I would like to have with you is, of course, how could we look at Unity from the context of geometry? So again, all of the content we work with here, we're very happy to share with you. So please reach out to Joe after the webinar, and we're happy to share all of this content so that you can try it when you're back at the office, wherever possible, of course. In this particular example, what you'll notice is we've got obviously a rectangular format by way of the page that we're dealing with, and then of course what we have additionally is we've got you know, rectangles of copy. So you can see all the body copy as well as the headlines are all rectangles. The images are rectangles, and then there are other rectangles like this kind of beigey brown rectangle that kind of just add to the duotones that we see in terms of the trees and so on. And then of course what we have is we've got these two circles. So what we thought we'd do is we'd explore how we could get Unity by way of geometry. So again, what we're going to do is I'm going to head over to the newly designed objects panel in CorelDRAW 2019. And we're going to head over to our layer, and you'll see that we have the round element here. We're going to go ahead and disable that for a moment in terms of view, and we're going to enable the square. So we're going to change that from a circle to a square or a rectangle more appropriately, just to see what the response is in terms of the visual play. And we'll do the same with this kind of semi-opaque circle that, or partial circles that we've got running through. So once again, I'll head over to the rectangular curve. Before I make that visible, let's hide the circular element, and we'll bring in the rectangle. So you can see again, we're using geometry to then kind of determine a play in terms of how things come together. Now, what must be said is that we're not proposing that you kind of do this, because the next page is a classic example of how content comes together using different geometric shapes. So for example, again, we've got a whole play of rectangles, that teal blue box down the left-hand side, and all the other components that you're seeing here, but a very beautiful play in terms of the navigation in this document. So we're working with circles in terms of the chapter numbers, as well as the page headers and page folios. You can see are of a circular nature, and then of course this just emphasizes that circle. So again, what we would suggest is to consider playing with these elements, but being aware of them in terms of unifying your design is going to make for a lot more happier design. And I find that I use Unity by way of color a hell of a lot in my work, and it works really well. Okay, so back to you then, Joe.
Thank you, Mo. And remember, please, you know, we want to try and make it as interactive as possible. So please post your questions as we're going through each design principle. Going on to the second design principle then, of balance, and giving you some practical examples of achieving balance. So as I understand it, Mo, you know, balance can be achieved from having a symmetrical design, and that you are basing your design on an axis, or even balance can be achieved with an asymmetrical design, but you know, you still got that equilibrium going on. And I think with balance, you know, that you've explained in the past that you to help with this, you use the sort of the rule of thirds. And I think you're going to show us a practical example of exactly how that works, and that can help you in your workflow.
Absolutely right. Thanks, Joe. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the rule of thirds. And of course, if you're not sure, you're welcome to ping any comments in the chat pod, and we'll be more than happy to discuss it. So as Joe was suggesting, if you were to just take our presentation here, this would be an asymmetrical balance. So your eye is drawn firstly to this very large circular logo with OTA market in it. And then secondarily, your eye is then drawn to balance, and then your tertiary element would be the Corel logo, and then, of course, at level 4 would be the copyright information. So you've got this hierarchy, and we basically take folks through a journey of storytelling when we do design, and that's perhaps something that's very well worth noting. So let's go ahead and look at how we can explore that, especially in terms of what Joe was referring to when we were talking about this concept of rule of thirds. And in this case, we're going to basically look at some business card designs for this particular client. Again, we're going to go ahead and open this. So when expressing rule of thirds, the way the tools that I use in CorelDRAW that I find extremely handy is graph paper. So if you have a look up at the top here, you'll see that my graph paper is broken out into 3x3 grids. I'm going to go ahead and create a grid set, and you'll end up with 9 rectangles as you're seeing currently. What we would then do, you guys, is we would head, I'm just needing to fight with GoToWebinar's iconography on my CorelDRAW screen as well. So I'm moving that up and down. So what we would need to do here is we'll head over to the objects panel or inspector if you're on Macintosh. As you know, Corel now fully plays on Mac as well. And there's our grid of 9 objects. I'm simply going to go ahead and drag this down to the master page. And that's going to make this grid available through to all of my pages down at the bottom. And as you'll see, we're going to be talking to symmetrical design or balance, asymmetrical, as well as approximate symmetry. So with that done, what we'll then go ahead and do, since it's topmost in our layer hierarchy, we're just going to lock that off so we don't inadvertently move it. Now, where this becomes handy, again, it's not meant to be restrictive, it's meant to be an aid. And where this becomes extremely handy is in the context of aligning objects. So if you take the logo now, once it's sitting perfectly okay, just this little nudge so that it kisses the bottom of that power zone makes it even more compelling, okay? Now, if we were to look at the back of the card, I'm going to jump to approximate symmetry here, all the way on the far right. What we've gone ahead and done, Joe and I, is we've applied a kind of lens to throw back the color, and we've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to use this rule of thirds grid to create an opening here as a suggestion of where the logo, kind of keeping that space almost sacrosanct in terms of the design. And then we're going to go ahead and select these elements here and just kind of tweak them as we see fit. So perhaps using the right tool would be appropriate. I'll go ahead and use the pick tool here. And what we're going to then go ahead and do, you'll see that we are on page 3 here. And these are the elements we're kind of currently working through, okay? So let's go ahead and choose, for example, there's our text, and there's our iconography. I'm simply going to go ahead and move the iconography over a little bit. So I'm using the rule of thirds grid as a basis for that. Now you'll see that, that we've got kind of nice alignment in terms of the letter forms here. But what I'd like to do is move this guy up just a tad. And you'll see that if we jump in here, this is made up of two objects. So I can go right in, select those two elements without ungrouping it even, and then just going ahead and shunting them exactly where we would like them. So this is approximate symmetry, right? If we head over to the right-hand side, there's my auto market copy, and there's, of course, our copy in terms of the person whose business cards this belong to, of course, right? So let's go ahead and select those two elements. And what we'll go ahead and do then is, again, I'm just doing this visually, but what we're doing is we're doing play against that line. So again, I'm just going to use my arrow keys to nudge that in, like so. Now, in terms of color, we want the color to fit a little better than it currently is at the moment. So we'll go ahead and pick up a color like this, which kind of is more in keeping with those. Of course, you can see we've got the muted ox blood on our document color palette as well. The final option we'd like to explore with you is, of course, asymmetrical balance. So if we jump to this design, what we're essentially doing when we're wanting to share it with client is we're saying, okay, we've got the dominant element, which is the element on the left-hand side. I'm quite sure you'll agree with that. We're going to go ahead and select this element and go ahead and nudge this out to the left. Okay, so let me just try and pick that up again. I'm going to nudge this element out to the left, like so. Which gives us that line. Again, what we'll do with this guy is we'll basically go ahead and just lock this out in the middle. So let's go ahead and select him very quickly, and he's sitting over perfectly there. And then we'll just select our copy and we'll push that out far right, say something like that. So this methodology that we're sharing, I guess, was made very, very famous by the likes of Leonardo. Leonardo uses this extensively in his work in terms of rule of thirds. You know, it's used in photography, architecture, and design very heavily. So if you're not using it currently, you may want to consider it. It's really, really powerful. And this, of course, then associates to something called the golden mean or the golden section, which is found in nature and math and of course, art and design. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Joe, who's going to take us through the next element that is equally exciting. Joe, back to you.
Thanks, Mo. I actually was going to suggest also that on that image, on that design, your rule of thirds also applied with colour, and that you had sort of 2/3 the warmer tone and 1/3 the sort of beige, which I think sort of I imagine therefore that the rule of thirds is not necessarily just about layout, but it's also about tones and images.
Absolutely right. What I find extremely handy, just to dovetail off what you're talking about there, Joe, is that you find that, you know, there's kind of tight cleanups that you're wanting to do. This becomes extremely handy. So you're spot on the money. I'd say you're on the money there.
Cool. So we will now jump into proportion. So on this design principle, proportion can come sort of down to, I guess, the size, so the elements that are appearing within your design and the proportionate ratio and weighting that they have in relation to one another within the design. And within that, you know, the ratio, how you can change those elements so that if you want something to really pop, how you can increase the ratio within and proportion within the design. And I guess that you'll show then, Mo, sort of how you can achieve that and how this menu card, for example, the division of how you have laid it out and how you can change that to sort of create a greater focal point within the actual design itself.
Right. So to Joe's point, again, you guys, you know, the design's presented to client, in this case, Joe, and she says, hey, listen, love the design, but can we throw more emphasis on the actual title or the name of the restaurant? And we could do that simply. I mean, what most of us probably would do is go ahead and select the copy and make that a little bigger and perhaps bold, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, okay, of course, right? In fact, in an example like this, it's probably good that we do that. Now you'll notice that we're working with paragraph text here, so I just need to make this guy a little deeper and wider. I'll just hold shift so it kind of stretches both ways. And already what you'll start seeing is in terms of dominance with regard to scale, we're starting to push the conversation away from menu to the name of the restaurant. In this case, Joe Levin's Yum Yum Restaurant and Fast Food. So Joe has just moved from running Otta Market in Tokyo to this cool space in downtown London, right? So what we're going to then go ahead and do is I'm just going to rearrange this a little higher. How could we lay more emphasis on this? So what you'll notice to what Joe was talking about earlier in terms of the rule of thirds and the weighting, you can see that in your mind's eye, you can break this up into roughly 3 sections, if you will, 3 trimesters, I guess. And what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to copy this element and I'm going to go ahead and just paste it down. So there's my first object. And it's a fairly strong element, again, warm color, more or less stretch it out to what we want. But before I do that, I just want to push it back so you can see this better. So again, we're going to right click. You'll notice with Corel that all of your functionality is very much up front and center. So we're going to go ahead and choose this. I'm going to choose behind. It's going to ask us what we'd like to place it behind, in this case, the text. And of course, we can then continue working with it. So we're going to just pull this down a little further. And you'll see now that we're starting to push the conversation, visually at least, towards the name of the restaurant, okay? And of course, what we'd like to do beyond that is to adjust the leading of our copy, right? So again, something that you can do very, very easily by simply going ahead and choosing the shape tool. And what we'll do here is we'll just pull this dude up a little bit here. And you can see we've got a tighter alignment in terms of heading, in terms of leading, not heading. Leading on the heading, that would be right, yes. The second component we'd like to look at in terms of this is we wanting to draw more emphasis on the social elements down the bottom of this list. So again, I'm going to head over to objects here and just share with you that that's currently sitting on layer 2. So what we'll do again is we'll go ahead and select this object, which is already copied by way of the first copy. So we'll just do a paste, right? And we'll go ahead and move that down. And I'm going to make that a little narrower. So say something like that. Again, for starters, let's just take it to the edge, which is not what we want as a final result. So you'll see this curve is sitting right at the top of our layer stack. And I'm going to go ahead and move it under our social elements, okay? Now, what we'd like to then do is watch how, by way of reducing its size or scale, as Joe alluded to earlier, we change the conversation. And now you can see that, I'm hoping what you guys are taking away from this is that you're in a very powerful position as crafters of visual content to guide the viewer's eye through the design and decide what they should be consuming first by way of all of these very cool design elements that Joe and I are talking you through. Okay, so if there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to cover them, but I'm going to pass it back to Joe so we can jump on to the next discussion point.
Thank you, Mo. So I think we're on to the next point, which is the rhythm. Yes. So I think, you know, you guys most probably are trained designers or have some experience with Draw, but, you know, from your own perspective, I'm sure that creating rhythm, you would do that in terms of using color within your design, or sizing to sort of size objects within the design that have that natural rhythm, or use elements that sort of create a focal point within a visual rhythm. But with this particular example, we're going to show you a particular tool within CorelDRAW, which is a Symmetry tool, which allows you to sort of take a simple object and almost resample it in it to create either a mirror image or, in this case, a sort of almost like a kaleidoscopic image, very, very simply, to create that natural rhythm. So Mo, back to you.
Thank you, Joe. So just to dovetail off, if you don't mind, of what you were just talking about there, Joe, I think what you guys take away from the conversation here is that, the Symmetry tool allows for, different levels of symmetry. We have, for example, in a previous iteration of Lunch and Learn, which you can find on our YouTube channel, we spoke to bilateral symmetry. So, a human face, or coffee pot, or something that would kind of have a motor vehicle. Those kind of things would be bilateral. Here we're looking at a rotational or a radial symmetry. So you've got this hexagonal kind of outplay in terms of the symmetry, and we might not even stick with hexagonal, because in our experimentation, Joe and I, we found that what's pretty cool is to actually have an odd number when using the Symmetry tool in Corel. So let me do less prattling and let's do more designing, shall we? So we're going to start, with a blank page, the ultimate nightmare for every designer. And what we're going to talk to is the Symmetry tool. And we're going to look at it, as Joe suggested, in the context of a radial symmetry in this case. So we've taken aspects of our floral design over here that we would like to now build out into a symmetry that makes sense and looks good. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to Object with our element selected, head over to Symmetry, and then choose Create New Symmetry. And what you'll see is Corel is dropping the symmetry down for us. Excuse me. Now you'll notice that it's slightly off kilter. I'm going to go ahead and choose 2 iterations of the symmetry, and the reason for that is then it gives us a horizontal and a vertical kind of guideline for us to work with. So let's go ahead and zoom in pretty tight. Okay, this is a rather large zoom. So we're sitting at about 3000%, right? It's a really big zoom. And Corel just crunches through the numbers, right? So we're going to go ahead and choose this guy here first, and we're going to just go ahead and drag it till it kisses the node. And I usually don't get it as spot on as that first time, but there we go. Spot on the mark, and then we'll do the same with this dude. So now we've got this kind of overlap. This guy's slightly out, so we'll just nudge this to the left. Perfect. So we've got a perfect symmetry going here. Let's look at the entire document once again. So I'll go F4 on our keyboard, which is of course View menu and zoom to fit. Command 0 for Mac users, if there are any Mac users of Corel on the call. And then we're going to go ahead and click on the second from last button on the far right hand side, show full preview. And in fact, I think what we'll do, Joe, with your permission, is we'll do a webinar on Mac and we'll do a webinar on PC, so you guys get a play of both platforms. And yeah. What we'll then do is we'll just go ahead and count up. So you can see now we're starting to build symmetry based on the number of copies we want. So that's 7. Let's take it a little further and see what happens. So what's cool about this is it's totally biological in nature, because you may start with a certain thinking, but you don't know where this is going to end up. It's pretty delicious, because you could end up with iterations that are really, really nice. So for those of us that are doing artistic work like mandalas and so on, this becomes extremely worth playing with. And then of course for those of us that are doing kind of the more technical stuff, you're doing shrubbery or architecture, whatever from a top view, absolutely brilliant for that type of thing. Okay. Now, so there's our mandala done. What we're going to do is hit the finish button. It looks a little stark at this point in time. So what we'll do is we'll head over to the Objects panel, or Docker in the case of Windows, and Inspector in the case of Mac. And you'll see that we've created a rectangle. So for purposes of time, we'll just create the rectangle. We'll tell you how it was done. In fact, there's no smoke and mirrors. What essentially is happening here is it's simply a rectangle the size of our canvas, and it's a straightforward elliptical fountain fill, as you can see. Again, picking up from the document color swatcher that we have off the bottom of our window over there. And then, of course, what we did was, what's really nice about the way Corel presents visual work is it's able to create this very kind of soft, ephemeral feel to your work, despite it being vector. So we created a power clip. Now, this power clip is pretty heavy, as you would expect, because we've got these thousands of pieces. And what you'll see happening is you've got this kind of Netflix kind of vibe going on now, right? It's kind of really cool Peter Jackson vibe going on. And basically what we have is we have a copy of the Symmetry one at the back. So, and we applied a Gaussian blur to that. In fact, let me jump into the power clip if time allows. It does. So I'll jump into the power clip very quickly and hit the edit button here. So you can see basically the elements in terms of how this power clip was put together. Let me just hit finish for a moment, and I'll twirl it open here on the objects Docker. Now, this is creating a fair amount of lifting load for the computer, okay, as you would expect. And essentially what we have is we've got a duplicate of this guy. We've kind of applied that into a power clip, so I can then explain to you what's going on. So there's our power clip, and if I were to zoom out a little bit, let's just hit F3 on our keyboard a couple of times. In fact, I'll try not to use keyboard shortcuts so you can see what's happening. So you've got this beautiful play of the artwork in 3 layers. And as you come forward, each layer is blurred less and less. So the one furthest back, the ones we're looking at on the far end, has been blurred quite substantially. And then as we come forward, it's blurred less and less. Okay, so that's basically how that was achieved. And then, of course, if we go ahead and zoom into full page size again, we wanted to just kind of get this to kick out a little bit. So we welded all of the objects together after breaking it apart, so a copy of this. And then, of course, all we did is applied a bit of a feather with a gradient overlay. So you'll see in the nodes at the moment. So let's click away so you can see the before and after. So that's the glow before and after. So you'll see it just kind of gives it that pop that makes it look, that makes it stand out even better, right? So let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit more in terms of the artwork, and you get a better sense of the view. Again, really compelling work that can be easily crafted in Corel without a lot of fuss. You know, if you're using competitor products, you have to buy plugins that cost, you know, £29, £30 additionally over your license, okay? And with that, let me close this off so we just kind of get a little bit more of memory back to our system. And then I'm going to hand it back to Joe, who is going to be sharing our next exciting possibility in terms of the design experience.
Thanks, Mo. So yes, so now we're going to touch upon contrast. So we just need to. So yeah, I think with this example, I think what we're going to really show you with Draw is how contrast can easily be achieved, you know, with different shades, different color tones, from light to dark or from cool to warm tones, and ways that the color harmony within the color harmony wheel within CorelDRAW can really help provide inspiration for those contrast colors. As well, I think, you know, contrast can be achieved through varying textures, elements within your design. So in this example, I think it would be good for you to see a great piece of font that Mo's going to create with which has a texture to it, which creates that immediate contrast within the design. Back to you, Mo.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, I think Joe packaged it so well. There's nothing more to say but to show you guys, right? So let me head to the Connect Docker once again, and we're going to go ahead and open the artwork. So let's pop that open. We have this beautiful illustration of an RT, and we're basically going to work through different elements. Again, just making it very relevant to your Corel workflow. And whilst we're doing that, we have a little bit of fun designing really compelling content as well. So to Joe's point, the first thing we can do in terms of talking of hot and cold is we can go ahead and change the background color and push it to a cool color. Right there, the artwork pops out at us. The second thing we can go ahead and do is let's head over to our objects panel. Again, we've got some hidden elements just to make things nice and clean. We've got the RT logo as I suggested. So I'll go ahead and unlock that and make it visible. And you'll see we have the RT logo sitting at the top. We're going to go ahead and twirl down into that. I could do a search for these elements using the advanced find and replace functionality that we have in CorelDRAW. But for this particular example, I think it'd be overkill, frankly. So we're going to go ahead and select that color. And we'll apply that color then to those elements, okay? Let's try that again. What are we doing? Okay, so this does tend to be a bit glitchy. I'll come to that. In fact, let's do it the other way around. So I'll select, in fact, let me show you how the advanced find and replace works because it is such a nifty little feature. So what we're wanting to do is, I'm going to go ahead and open the advanced find and replace Docker. And you'll find it right at the top of the list here. And what we'd like to then do is I want to maybe pick up that red and have it in all of the orange that we have. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and select one single orange element. And I'll say from selection. And the reason it's saying that is probably locked. Oh, there we go. And then, of course, I can go ahead and do is hit edit query. And you'll see that this is where we're able to choose all of the components for that particular object. Okay, so that's basically how that happens. Now what we can go ahead and do is pick up our color picker, choose the color we want, and we can then decide where we want to apply it. So we can do this on a element by element basis, or if we wanted, we could just do it overall. So let's look at the overall functionality. So that's typically how we would work, right? So what I'll go ahead and do here is I'll go ahead and select one of these elements here, and you can see I'll just drag it out so you can see that that's that element there. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Had the wrong tool selected, apologies. Let's go ahead and do this again. So you can see that this is a grouped object, right? So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and select an element. I don't want to ungroup it necessarily, you guys. So sometimes you don't want to do that, right? So we're going to dive straight into the artwork, but we do want to pick up all of the oranges in this artwork. And there you can see I've got a curve that's orange. Good enough. I can choose that, or if you're not comfortable with that, just maybe want to choose something a little bit more substantial. We'll go to you know, any orange element. Okay, so we've got that. Let's go back to our advanced find and replace. Remember the first time it said, not quite sure what you want. So now we have an object and we'll say from selection. So it's picked up all of the properties. You see, this has come alive. And I'm going to hit find all. It's going to fail initially. Now I'm going to share with you why. We're going to say yes to this, of course. And it's only selected that one object, which is not what we would have expected, right? If you go into edit query, what essentially then happens is if we scroll up, we'll start with curves. The reason we're not getting what we're wanting is because Corel, based on that selection, is looking for 39 nodes exactly in terms of the curve. So it's doing such a good job that it's overcompensating for our selection. So we're just looking through which components it's picked up. We don't really mind whether there's overprint or not. And we really don't mind whether it has an outline or not. And of course, this you can save, so you can use it as a preset over and over again. So now if we hit the Find All button, we've picked up all orange. Let's see, I'm just gonna hit the delete key and you can see all the orange is gone, see? So it's that easy. And then of course, we just need to go ahead and say, okay, that's the color I want, for example, okay? I prefer the orange, so I'm gonna undo that for a moment. But that's basically how the find and replace functionality works. The second component that Joe alluded to was basically in terms of contrast, we're going to go ahead and bring in a Dodger logo. Now, we brought in a fairly low resolution logo, which we're going to pop open in the objects panel once again. So let me get the objects panel open. I'm just going to scroll to the top and I'm going to twirl down a couple of these elements, just close them out. And we'll do the same for the bitmap, right? So there's our bitmap element, which currently is hidden. So let's unlock it and let's make it visible. So there's a bitmap that we're going to go ahead and quickly trace. I'll just zoom into that so you can see it better. So there's our charger logo that we'd like to use. I'll go ahead and select that. Hit trace bitmap. We're going to go outline trace and I'm going to choose logo. We could choose a detailed logo, of course, but for purposes of time, logo is good enough, right? And of course, let's maximize this window so you get a full sense of what's going on. And then, of course, what you'll see is that the bolds of the A, the G, and the E are not coming through. So what we're going to do is just tweak there's our A and G sorted, not yet the E. So we'll just kind of tweak our detail slider so we get exactly what we want. 100%. So that was quick and easy. We'll hit the OK button on that. We don't need the bitmap anymore, so we'll delete that. And you can see there's our element. Now remember that this is meant to be a background element, so we're going to go ahead and stretch it out. I'm just going to go full page view again. And what we're going to then do is push it behind the car, okay? Say something like that. So it's going to sit over there. Doesn't look very compelling yet. And what we'll then do is I'm just going to go ahead and, in fact, let me do this. Sorry, give me a moment. Let's get rid of those. I was undo happy there. Let's get rid of those. Good.
While Mo is doing that, just to remind you, if there's anything you want to ask based on what you've just seen, please just post it now, and we can revisit any of the particular principles or designs that Mo showcased. So just drop your question into the pod.
Yes, absolutely. Good point there, Joe. Please do that, you guys. So we know that you guys are getting value, right? Okay, so there's our element. What we're going to then do with this element is we're going to basically go ahead and move it all the way to the bottom, right, of our layer stack. So let me go ahead and select the pick tool. There's my element selected. It's a group of 2 objects, as you can see. I'm just going to right click, go to order. Of course, there's multiple ways. You can use keyboard shortcuts, whatever. And we're going to just say to back of layer. Now this has gone all the way to the back below the rectangle. So we'll go ahead and just move that up one. And there it is. So, that you can do, that you know how to do. So there's nothing fancy about that. But what we wanted to explore with you guys is in the context of contrast. If we were to go ahead and choose a color that's not too dissimilar from the background color. So in fact, let's go ahead and choose the same color or a similar color. And what we'll then like to do is we'd like to play with texture in terms of contrast. So again, typically what you would go out and do in an image editing tool, we can do directly inside of Corel. What do we mean by that? If we head over to Properties and we go over to the Transparency tab within Properties, most of us tend to use transparency in terms of blending modes and of course the opacity, which is perfectly cool. But there is options to the far right that are pretty cool as well. And that, for example, is a vector pattern. That, for example, is a bitmap pattern. And what you're starting to see now is we're getting degraded or distressed type, okay? And what's pretty fun is if you then go ahead and pick up your interactive transparency tool, we can go ahead and create this very cool look that you're seeing on screen here. And you can see we've got this play of color and tonality inside of our artwork, and I'm trying to get it into the car, and that's looking pretty cool. And then finally, as I said to you, what you're able to do is you're able to apply live effects. So we're going to do a quick live effect here. We're going to do a blur, and we are going to do a motion blur. So motion blur will give us a greater sense of play, and that's a little too strong, so we'll just pull that back a little bit. Some of these settings are sticky, and there we have it, right? So you can see we've got a great play. Now, the final thing we'd like to share with you, of course, is Joe alluded to the fact that you can go ahead and tweak colors by way of this very cool color styles docker that we have. So let me pop that open. There's our color styles docker. I'm going to go ahead and select everything, and we're going to simply go ahead and let me pick up the right tool, of course. Select everything and go ahead and drag that in as a color group. And we're going to take this down to one group. I find that that's most controllable. So you have great degrees of tight control by using that functionality. And then once again, we can go ahead and click on that. And now you'll see you've got a color wheel that's coming live at the bottom for us to tweak color and play with contrast. That looks really nice, I have to admit, Joe. That looks even better. That's kind of taking me back to kind of my time in Cuba, right? Really awesome. So yeah, so you've got this real world play in terms of the Corel experience. That's a lot of fun. And then of course we've got all of these other beautiful options like complementary colors. So you can see the green just popped out a whole lot more than it did previously. because it's gone to the opposite end of the spectrum. We've got triads and tetrads, tetrad being 4 colors, triad being 3 colors, and then you can, if you're wanting to just mute all of the colors, you can go analogous. And that looks pretty wicked too. I'm just gonna wait for it to pop on the other side so you get a sense of what's going on. All right, so that was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I'm gonna hand it back to Joe, and we are on to the last one, I believe, Joe.
We are, yeah. Thanks, Mo. So the last design principle we want to focus on is about dominance and or emphasis. So within this design here on the right, you can see we're going to quickly showcase to you how you can use a color to really sort of, or a visual to provide emphasis or an accent to a design. Of course, like color, tonal differences, or injecting a real sort of strong color in your visuals will give you that pop and create that emphasis. Or changing the size or scale of a particular element so that the eye is drawn to a particular visual piece of the design that you want the user to see. So I think with that, Mo, you're just going to quickly run through some of those emphasis principles.
Absolutely. So as Joe packaged for you guys, I'm just closing out some files that we don't need to have open. I'll head back to the Connect Docker once again, and we're going to be working with this sail file. So let's go ahead and open it. And yeah, it's a pretty strong design, nice use of strong color, etc., etc. And you can see again, you know, the scale and the proportion of the word sail draws the viewer attention directly to that. And to Joe's point, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So the Connect Content Docker is not just a kind of shortcut in terms of visual access to your artwork. Excuse me. Of course, here what you can go ahead and do is you can access all of the content that ships with Corel absolutely free. So all of your clip art libraries are available to you via the Connect Content Docker. So for those of us that have previously worked with the Corel Connect through previous versions or previous iterations of Corel, what's worth pointing out to you here is that the workflow is now all embedded within Corel. So you don't need to go to an external source. It's all right here. And of course, for Macintosh users, what is exciting is that the content inspector gives you this kind of high-level, high-quality access to all of your resources and assets, courtesy of your license with Corel. So, of course, in this particular example, as Joe alluded to, pictures worth 1,000 words, we really want to focus on the images that we may be able to use from our library. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the computer to not show us vector objects. So essentially what she then comes back to us with is says, hey, here's your entire library of images. And Joe and I quite like this tulip, so we're going to use it in the context of the design. We both believe it's quite complementary, so let's go ahead and drag that out. And we're going to leave it as such for now, just so that we get a sense of the play in terms of how we can accentuate this design. That said, what we're going to do is I'm going to head over to the properties panel, or Docker more appropriately. I was going to say inspector for a minute, it's gone Mac on you guys there. The property Docker, and we're going to enable the transparency option once again. And you'll find that you have a whole plethora of different possibilities in terms of how you can get this to blend. So for example, there's an add, which obviously is blowing out too much of the highlights for me. And then there's, of course, multiply, which will kind of overall kind of create a darker sense, and that's working quite well. So we might revert to that in a minute. Let's try another. Another one of my favorites is overlay. And I'm quite liking overlay because what overlay is doing for us here is bringing through, let's just move this over a little bit more. It's bringing through the richness of the color in the original design and then emphasizing it by way of the image. So images can be used together with type to create a very strong messaging forum for yourselves. Of course, what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to go ahead and quickly draw a rectangle from edge of page to edge of page, like so. And with that still selected, I'll just head over to the Object Inspector for a moment, or Docker more appropriately. Right-click on that rectangle and head down to about midway and choose Create Empty Power Clip Frame. So you'll see there's a kind of cross running through it, or an X, and that's kind of giving us an indication that that's a power clip frame. As you know, what we'll then do is take the artwork and simply go and dump it inside of that power clip frame. That looks gorgeous, if I do say so myself. What we'll then do is hit center, because we just want to position this in the center. And in fact, you know what? I'm thinking that perhaps what we want to do is we want to position it off kilter a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this and move it off center. Again, using that rule of thirds grid. I haven't put on one here, but using the kind of same methodology in terms of thinking. So I'm deliberately creating an asymmetrical balance in terms of that conversation. Yeah, and that I think is a winner. I'm hoping you agree, Joe. Yeah, so that's, go ahead.
It looks fabulous, yeah. And very seasonal, because there's lots of tulips around in the UK at least. Yeah, thank you, Mo. Yeah. I mean, that's the last sort of principle that we're going to cover, showing you the principles within CorelDRAW Graphics Suite 2019. I apologise. I think there was a few audio issues to begin with, so but I can't see any. We'll give it a minute or so, but can't really see any questions relating to the actual webinar. So if we have missed those questions though, then we'll come back and answer them separately to you. We will post the webinar on YouTube, and we'll also send out a recording of the webinar and a link to all the files that you've seen presented here today via an email through to you after this session has finished. So yeah, so with that, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned something, and thank you very much to Mo Yogi as well for presenting another great webinar. So thanks a lot, guys, and I hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.